Hello, welcome into the Sport Life YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Ward. Let's get right into today's video. So in today's video, we're going to be covering the NFC East. In our previous video, we covered everything that came with the NFC West, from how they finished to how the 26 offseason really got, underway for them, and all the roster changes, coaching, foundational changes they had to make, to get ready for this 26 season. So as we dive into the NFC East, obviously the team that's been the most dominant team in that division the past few years has been the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you obviously have the Dallas Cowboys, who are always in the conversation, whether it's, in the media or actually competing on the field. They're always going to be relevant with any NFL season. And you have the Washington Commanders as well as the New York Giants. This division had a lot of change. As we're recording this video, A.J. Brown has not been traded, but he very well could be traded as of June 1st. And I know a lot of people are anticipating that, and that's going to create some sort of shift, in power in the NFC East. The Eagles have just had so much talent, over these last few years. It's just been so undeniable for them not to get 11, 12 wins every single year, despite all the drama that comes with that team. They just win. They win every single year, and it's so hard to overcome the talent that they put on the field. It's truly impressive, and in my opinion, best GM in pro sports right now, or at least in the NFL, is Howie Roseman. I mean, he hits on his draft picks. He makes great trades. He does so much for that team to make them a competitive product on the field every single year. So, I tip my cap to them, especially to Howie Roseman. So let's start off with the best team in the NFC East, the team that's really been the dominant force. They've been to 2 Super Bowls lately. They won a Super Bowl. Last year didn't go too well. They lost to the San Francisco 49ers at home. And that really, created a lot of question marks, especially some questions that were building as the season was going on, right? There's been some friction between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. And, anytime you got literally you could easily say 2 of your top 3 players not on the same page, especially when it's a quarterback and a wide receiver, that's going to create a lot of friction and dysfunction for your team. And, going forward, it looks like they've decided to make some sort of change. They looked at this past season and they said it's not sustainable and this relationship can't get better. So they've had to make some pivots. Last season they finished first in the NFC East, went to the playoffs, lost to the San Francisco Niners in the first round. And so going into this offseason, they had a lot of questions, right? They saw a decline in Saquon Barkley's, production from the season ago. Just the offense in general just wasn't humming on the same level it was. It was just an absolute juggernaut machine rolling all the way to the Super Bowl. And, a lot of it had to do with their OC, Kevin Patullo, but you started hearing some things, right? Like you started hearing some well-known media personalities hearing that, may not all be Kevin. Jalen Hurts isn't as adaptive to other new offenses. He kind of likes to stay with what he likes. He's not as flexible as people would like him to be in order to grow and evolve as an NFL offense. So those questions are coming to the forefront. And so they made a shift. They went and got Sean Mannion, who, has been on the Packers offensive staff for the past few years, and they're hoping he brings some sort of blend of that Shanahan scheme over. I'm sure Jalen Hurts is going to have his input on some things he likes to do, and they're just going to have to find a way to make it mesh all together as opposed to, one way or the other. It's a partnership, especially between the OC and the quarterback, and it's got to work for the benefit of the team. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, just because you're bringing a certain scheme over and you're doing all these things doesn't mean it's going to work. Calling plays is a completely different monster in itself. There's a timing to it. There's situational awareness. There's all sorts of different factors that rely on, when to call plays, instincts, how the defense is looking and what sort of sets and schemes you're able to run and put out there. It's not as easy as just inputting a system and saying go. So, this is a big year for Philly. Let's see if Sean Mannion can really, figure it out and put a great product on the field. Even without A.J. Brown, they still have tons of talent, tons. And, AJ hasn't left the team, but they've made the moves necessary to help recover for when AJ's gone, right? They've signed Hollywood Brown. They've traded for Dontavian Wicks. They drafted Mekhi Levin at pick 20, which I think there's quite a few people in the industry that thought, wow, that guy really slipped to 20. And we're all thinking, wow, Howie gets another guy again. He gets Quinyon Mitchell, who slipped. He gets Cooper DeJean, who people thought slipped. Jalen Carter, who he thought slipped. So, another guy that falls right into his lap. And, seems like a good A.J. Brown replacement. And just to be clear, no one's A.J. Brown. But to get a quality receiver like that at pick 20, when you're probably going to lose that guy, you couldn't have asked for anything more, man. And so, good on them to do the best they can to kind of replace the production. I want to touch on another draft pick that, the Eagles just seem to run a factory on his tight ends. Naturally you go from Brent Selleck to Zach Ertz, and then you go from Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert. Now it looks like you're going Dallas Goedert to Eli Stowers, who a lot of people thought was the best tight end in this draft. And I think there were some people that thought he was probably as good as Kenyon Sadiq. We'll see how that turns out. But what a great situation for Eli Stowers to step into. Jalen Hurts loves his tight ends. You look at Dallas's production in the past couple of years. I mean, it shows that he's definitely a favorite of Jalen Hurts. And so, we'll see if Dallas is on this team come next year. It could very well be Eli Stowers' spot next year. He doesn't have to get rushed into it this year, and he can kind of learn from a great Philadelphia Eagle and Dallas Goedert, and then really hopefully take the reins next year for this Philly offense. So just a couple of draft picks that they made, Stowers and Lemon, some youth, get cheaper on the contracts, and, help sustain, this team going forward that, they're going to need. And that's the hard part of, sustaining a successful NFL franchise is how do I make some sacrifices, cut some costs while still maintaining talent and production on the field. And, there's no better guy to do that than Howie Roseman. And so far he's making those necessary moves and setting it up that way so that, they're not just completely hindered by the cap, and they can get younger and cheaper and still maintain talent in certain spots. So my hat's off to him. Let's see if it turns out that way. I think this is a massive year for Devontae Smith. Me personally, huge Devontae Smith fan. Love the way that guy plays football. I know he is an absolute favorite in Philly. And I think a lot of Philly fans are really excited to see what he could become, with wide receiver one targets. I'm not sure if he's ever had 150 targets in a season. 140 targets even. I would have to go back and look, but he's always been the number 2 behind AJ, aside from his 1 year as a rookie. And this offense, for the most part, it's been run first. It's been built off this run game. And so, and I'm not thinking that's going to change at all. I think they're going to go back to really running a lot with Saquon Barkley. But when you look at the pass catchers that Hurts is going to be throwing to, right, there's a lot of unfamiliar faces, right? Dontavian Wicks, he's never played with him. He's never played with Hollywood Brown, Mekhi Lemon, Eli Stowers. It's Goddard and Devontae. And Devontae's going into the prime of his career. And, I think a lot of reason why people think he's going to have a huge year is not just from the targets, but I think they've just thought he's that talented. That he's that level of wide receiver. Potentially 100 catch, 1,400 yard, 8 to 10 touchdown guy. I believe he absolutely has that in him. He's probably had the greatest wide receiver season I've ever seen by a college wide receiver when he won the Heisman in Alabama. I mean, I've never seen a guy literally be the focal point of an offense and everything ran through him and did all those things. And, he didn't even have a true number 2 to take pressure off. Najee Harris was in the backfield, but Jalen Waddle hurt himself earlier in that year. And they had Mac Jones stepping in at quarterback, and he absolutely dominated. You couldn't cover him one-on-one. They schemed him up. They did a great job getting the ball in his hands, letting him make plays after the catch. And all the defensive attention was on him, and you couldn't stop him. You literally couldn't stop the guy. And we've seen some great wide receiver seasons, whether it's, Jamar Chase, Brian Thomas had a 17 touchdown season a few years ago. We've seen some incredible seasons. We've never seen anything like Devontae Smith at Alabama in his last year. It was truly remarkable. And, I'm really excited to see what he can do as a potential wide receiver one. I think he's going to absolutely explode. From a fantasy perspective, I would definitely target him. But yeah, definitely some fun stuff for Philly fans. This is a big year for Jalen Hurts, right? Like, they're going to eventually have to figure out, do we extend this guy? Right? Is Nick Sirianni really the head coach we want? Again, those questions came up again this past season. My opinion, I think it's really hard to let go of a head coach that's been to 2 Super Bowls and won a Super Bowl, and every year they're winning 10-plus games. That's just hard to find. I know they have the talent on the field, but are you telling me that you're going to find a better option out there? Okay, shoot a name out. I'm not so sure. And, it's always interesting. I think fans always like it when their coach, either coaches the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side of the ball. Like, you got a Kyle Shanahan or DeMeco Ryans or Robert Saleh or a Matt LaFleur or whatever it is. Like, you just have someone who controls one side of the ball, and he's kind of just the coach. Like, he just oversees everything. And so the question naturally comes up, okay, so what do you contribute to the team? Like, what's your specialty? I'm sorry, at this point, you just got to say he wins. He wins. He wins games. He goes to Super Bowls, and he's won a Super Bowl. It's so hard to find, man. So I think it's a hard time to let him go. I personally wouldn't. But those questions are going to keep coming up unless they have a better season this year. And they still have all the talent in the world. They still have a great defense. They lost Jalen Phillips, but then they go sign Jonathan Grenard, or they get him in a trade. So that was a big move by them. They still have a lot of great foundational pieces. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, absolute monsters on their D-line. Their secondary is absolutely elite. You lose Reed Blankenship, that's going to hurt some veteran presence, but you still got Kenyon Mitchell, you still got Cooper DeJean, you signed Tariq Woolen to a 1-year, $15 million deal. I mean, absolute one of the elite back ends defensively going into the NFL season. So, this is going to be quite the opportunity for them to bounce back hard this year. And I'm excited to see how that team turns out, because there's just too much talent for that team not to win 10-plus games. I still have them finishing first in the division coming this season. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, because, injuries happen, trades happen, so on and so forth. But with the level of talent, the core, the consistency, I truly believe they're going to win somewhere between 10 and 12 games, and they're going to finish first in their division, and they could be potentially challenging for an NFC number 1 seed. So that leads me to the next team that should be right on their coattails this year. Everyone's favorite American team, the Dallas Cowboys. Last year, I think it was kind of an odd year for them, right? Like, you saw progress, you saw a lot of things to get excited about. Brian Schottenheimer, I think, had a great rapport with Dak Prescott. You could see the chemistry on the field and how the offense, built and ran. I think there was an obvious flaw with that defense, aside from Matt Eberflus, who just wasn't the fit. It just didn't work out. He didn't create the turnovers that they would have liked. But to be fair, he didn't have the personnel either. He lacked a lot of talent on that side of the ball. So he didn't have a whole lot to work with, if we're going to be totally honest here. They get Kenyon Williams in the middle of the season via trade. Their back end just absolutely got decimated. Trevon Diggs, didn't turn out to be the player they were hoping when they signed that massive contract. A bunch of other guys just didn't turn out the way they would have liked. They lacked edge rush help, to really put pressure on the quarterback. And again, your front seven, and mainly those guys up front on the defensive line, they help the secondary, on all phases. They help them in all the best ways possible. It's less time they got to cover. It's less time that they got to, make their assignments a lot harder. And, D-line's got to complement each other. The back end's got to help the defensive line and make it all synonymous in one. And I don't think they got enough edge help to really put pressure on the QB going forward. On the offensive side of the ball, they were absolutely explosive. Dallas has always had a great offensive line. It's kind of a foundation and a pillar of the Dallas Cowboys. Is they're going to have a good O-line. They're going to be physical up front. And, as much criticism as Dak really gets, we got to acknowledge that Dak is truly one of the great regular season quarterbacks in the NFL. If you really stack his numbers, like you stack his numbers against so many of the other QBs of the past 15 years. He really is elite in the regular season. He is. I mean, his numbers are truly awesome. And, it helps when you got a guy like CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. And, Jake Ferguson's a pretty solid tight end. Reclamation project and Javonte Williams, who landed himself a big deal. And he looked like, he fit perfectly into that Dallas offense. But Dak's still throwing the ball. And if you watch him, like if you truly just watch a game, you sit down and you watch a Dallas Cowboy game, instead of just watching the highlights and watching all the blooper reels, like watch the game. That guy's in full control at the line of scrimmage. He understands everything he's seeing. He steps up and he's got so much experience, watching the game, from, just all the reps he's taken throughout the years. He really isn't surprised anymore. I think at times when we see the mistakes, I think it's the pressure he's applying to himself to really prove so many people wrong, because he wants to prove Jerry and the Dallas fans and himself. He wants to prove himself that I am one of those elite guys. And I think that's when those mistakes happen. But again, when I really look at him, he has full control of what he's seeing. He knows exactly what he needs to do on the offensive side of the ball. He gets his guys in the right spots. He's super accurate quarterback. I think he delivers some absolute dimes if you really watch him play. And again, I think he's a hell of a leader. I mean, what position in all sports is highlighted more than the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys? Name one. In all sports, baseball, basketball, you pick it, right? It's the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. And you don't really hear a lot of controversy for the most part with him. Not a lot of whole off-the-field stuff with him. You don't really hear teammates ripping on him or bashing him too much. Guy just seems like a leader, and it seems like guys do want to play hard for him. And they want to grind for him, and they want to, be successful with him. As Dallas goes into the season, I thought, they had to make some necessary changes, right? Obviously on the back end of the defense, and Dallas Cowboy fans were cheering so loud when they got Caleb Downs out of Ohio State. And I think it's so funny when we were listening to the draft, all these experts are saying like, well, I don't know what kind of player he is. Is he a cover safety? Is he more in the box safety? Like, what's his true position? I think you can dig too deep and you just forget that guy's a football player. I don't care what position you put him in. That guy's going to make plays. His instincts and his physicality and the speed he plays with sideline to sideline and the plays he can make, that guy's just a football player. He'll figure it out. Whatever spot you want to put him in, he'll figure it out, right? Michael Parsons. Guy came out of Penn State into the draft. You didn't know if he was going to be an edge rusher, an off-ball linebacker, the Mike linebacker, whatever it was. But he was a football player in the true sense of the word, and he's going to figure it out. You just got to give him some opportunities. And I think Dallas was like, all right, we'll take Caleb Downs. In my opinion, I think he was a top 5 player in this draft. I think he's got all pro potential listed all over him. You look at that Ohio State defense, I mean, there's no shocker they were as elite as they were because of Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, just athletic football freaks that can make any sort of play you needed them to. And I think Caleb Downs is going to be tremendous for Dallas. I mean, I think he could potentially be a game changer for that defense. We'll see how it turns out, but I got a lot of hope for that guy. They made some other great moves. They got Malachi Lawrence. They drafted him in the late 20s. Rashawn Gary they signed. He averages about 8 sacks a year. It's better than what they've gotten. They just need him to be healthy, but you add him to the edge of that defense, that's going to make a big difference. Jalen Thompson, they signed to a 3-year, $30-something million deal away from Arizona. Again, helped that back end secondary. You can tell that this defense was heavily influenced by Christian Parker. All right, their new defensive coordinator who came over, who was, he's had a huge imprint on the Philadelphia Eagles secondary as well as the Denver secondary, and those are two of the most elite secondaries in all the NFL. So you see what Jerry is trying to do, right? He's identifying, okay, that's the weak part of our defense. We need to go get somebody that can highlight that part. Now, there's more to it than just having an elite secondary. You got to call the entire defense. You got to coach the whole thing. D-line, linebackers, nickel corner, safety, whatever. But you can tell that they're obviously addressing a certain area of need. And I think, his influence in getting Caleb, I think anybody's drafting Caleb Downs at the spot they got him at. But Jalen Thompson, Rashawn Gary to also, again, help out the back end. I think that, his influence is heavily involved. And listen, his work with the Eagles corners and with the DBs in Denver, they're elite. They're absolutely elite in their respective positions. And so obviously he's had a huge hand in that. Dallas is like, all right, we're going to give this guy a chance. We've seen his work. Let's see if he can expand on it and really help our team. George Pickens signs the franchise tag. They need that guy back. Him and CeeDee Lamb were maybe the best 1-2 punch in all of football from a wide receiver standpoint. I don't think CeeDee was totally healthy last year, but I think if you get a healthy CeeDee and George, that's going to be pretty dynamic. And, I think there's a natural curiosity, like, is George going to do this again? There were some inconsistent years in Pittsburgh, but he finally got a quarterback in Dak that can really showcase his abilities. And, he's on the franchise tag, so he's kind of playing it for another prove-it year to kind of get the big deal he wants. So I think George is going to come in extra motivated to really prove like, hey, that wasn't just a one-off. I'm that guy. I am that level caliber of player, and I'm going to deliver. So we'll see how it turns out. I expect Dallas to put up a ton of points. The question is, can their defense just slow them down enough? I don't think they're asking their defense to be a top 5 elite defense. It'd be great, don't get me wrong, but they're just saying, hey, just slow them down enough, because if you can do that, they're not going to keep up with us in points. And they showed that. They can put up points with the best of them. And they have all the talent in the world, and Schottenheimer's going to dial that thing up, man. So, for Dallas, their hope is, all right, can our defense just improve enough to give us chances to win games, because our offense is going to do that. I have them somewhere winning between 9 and 11 wins. I think the offense is still the offense. I think it's still going to put up points. I think the question is does all the moves they made for their defense, does that do enough to kind of help them? Kenny Clark and Kennan Williams and Rashawn Gary, those are some good foundational pieces for your D-line. Malachi Lawrence, can he be a high productive first-round pick? If they can do that, I think that goes a long way. I really do. I think Caleb Downs is going to come in and be absolutely impactful. I don't think there's a learning curve for that guy. I think that guy's just an absolute monster. So, yeah, I probably have them between 10 and 11 wins, if I'm going to be fair. And I expect them to be competing with the Eagles all the way to the end of the season. All right, that leads us into our next team, the Washington Commanders. Main storyline of this team from last year and going into this year, can Jaden Daniels be healthy? Period. End of story. This whole thing hinges on the number 2 overall pick, who had maybe the greatest rookie season we've ever seen. Took a team to the NFC Championship game in his rookie year. Had so many late game comebacks, incredible composure. Had this absolutely dynamic blend of Lamar Jackson agility and rushing ability, but with just absolute precision that you just don't really see from rookies. And quick release from the quarterback position. He was just a dynamic blend. And if he can get back to that, they're going to be competitive, and they're going to be pushing for 9-10 wins. So again, it all starts with Jaden Daniels. They still bring back Dan Quinn. They bring back another GM in Adam Peters. Came from San Francisco. He was part of their early days. And, he's trying to replicate a lot of what he's seen over here, and have his own little touch and blend on it. They made some certain offseason acquisitions I don't know if I entirely agree with. So they signed Odafe Owe to a $100 million deal. Here's my worry with him. If you watch him with Baltimore, that was not a $100 million guy. They gave him up for pennies. And they wanted him to be better, but he was never that high end of a productive player when they gave him up. He goes to the Chargers and has this late season surge, and that's why he gets the contract he gets. But that would worry me as a Commanders fan. There's just not enough consistency for me to feel good about the money we gave that guy. And you need him to be, an explosive edge rusher, creating pressure. And there's nothing better, I think, for a defense than a guy who can create pressure and put pressure on the quarterback. But $100 million, I would like to see a little more consistency out of that guy. We'll see. Maybe he really was refound under Jesse Minter, with the Chargers, and really redefined himself, and maybe this is the player he's going to be. I would have some pause, and I would wait and see to see truly, if he is that guy, because I got some worry. Chig Okonkwo, I hope I said that right. Tight end, came from Tennessee. They signed him to a 3-year, I think it was a $36 million deal. Could have been 30. Just brings a tight end target to Jaden Daniels. And if you watch Zach Ertz's production the past couple of years, Jaden loves his tight ends. And this guy's basically just a big wide receiver that, can play from the tight end position. And we'll see how it turns out. He was productive over there. It didn't really have the great quarterback play, so I actually do like this signing. I think it can be a sneaky, high productive signing. They needed to add some more weapons on the outside to complement Jaden, and they did that, not on the high end, not with some big names, but they brought back some familiar faces, and they brought, some productive players, some reliable players. Nothing super game-changing or explosive, but this is one of those guys that I think could really help them. They signed Rachaad White, running back that came over from Tampa. His specialty is he's a great receiver out of the backfield. You look at him as a pure running back, just rushing. He's not efficient. He's not that explosive. Doesn't really impact the game as much on that side of the ball. But I think their plan for this guy is to really be that pass catching back, really be that Austin Eckler sort of outlet for Jaden. And, they got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and they got some other guys that, can make a difference. But I think with Rachaad White, his job is like, hey, if you can catch 50 to 60 balls for us out of the backfield, great. We got our money's worth. That's the kind of player we wanted. They really need him to fill that Austin Eckler kind of role, because you can tell it really benefited Jaden in his rookie year, and you could tell they missed it. They got back Diami Brown. It's always funny when situations like this happen, right? Like he has somewhat of a productive year for a team, goes and signs this massive contract that no one would have ever thought, and then that he doesn't perform up to expectations, which I always think is funny, because it's like, you look at his history, it hasn't shown that he deserved that kind of money. But he comes back to a familiar team, a team that knows him. He understands for the most part what they're trying to do, and I think he's going to provide a nice familiar face for Jaden. And they're going to need it. And so, like I said, they've provided some offensive help for Jaden. Obviously, the biggest one is, can Terry McLaurin stay healthy for a full year? We saw how he was with Jaden in year one. Double-digit touchdowns, 1,000 yards, absolutely dynamic down the field. You always had to respect what he could do, big playability. And so, if you can get that and, get some production from Chig and Diami and Rachaad White, I think you're going to see, an uptick in their offensive production. And I think a guy that they would like to see really take the reins is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, rookie running back who, at times they gave him some full-time spots and sometimes they didn't. But it really came down to whether, some inconsistencies I think they saw from that guy. They definitely had a backfield by committee. And so when it comes with that, it's tough to gain a rhythm as a running back, but you saw the explosive runs. At times you would just see these, boom, explosive 20-yard runs, 30-yard runs, and you saw the talent and you wanted more of that as a fan. But we'll see. I hope he takes that leap this year, from a fantasy perspective. I have him on a few teams, but you want to see some more consistency out of him, and you want to see him get a month, right? You want to see a month of 15-plus touches, 20-plus touches, to really see what you got in this guy. Because if he can be the player that you're hoping he can be, then it's a game changer for your offense, and you now have a high-end productive player on a cheap deal. It can truly go a long way. So with all that said, right, they added some other defensive pieces. Caleb Chason, Charles Omenihu, who I personally like, very underrated pass rusher. Leo Chenal, linebacker, got a lot of Super Bowl experience. So again, yeah, like I feel like they made all the necessary adjustments, to their defense that they were trying to identify and get better at. And we'll see if it pans out. Dan Quinn's a defensive-minded head coach. Obviously, comes from that Legion of Boom, fraternity. We'll see if they can turn it around. I think the patience with Washington could get a little thin. You sign Dan Quinn, he gets you to the NFC Championship year 1. Year 2, it's hard to put on him, because Jaden Daniels gets hurt, etc. But you got to produce year 3, otherwise I think the questions are going to come back up. Like, is he the guy, right? You look at Atlanta when he was with Atlanta, right? Had this great start, took him to a Super Bowl, should have won that Super Bowl, but then it kind of burned out quickly. So you're hoping it's not a repeat occurrence with Washington, but time will tell, and you got to see how this thing plays out. All right, the team I'm actually really excited to talk about is the New York Football Giants. They had the coaching hire of the coaching cycle this offseason in John Harbaugh, who left the Baltimore Ravens after years of consistency and dominance, and just established one of the true, really one of the cultures you always wanted to be a part of. I mean, what they were known for, right, was physicality, defense, toughness, willing to play you anywhere, anytime. Just had some incredible Hall of Fame players, throughout those runs. Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, Anquan Bolden was an absolute stud on some of those teams. Joe Flacco had some memorable moments during that Super Bowl run. Obviously Lamar Jackson, the list goes on and on, Terrell Suggs. And he really built something there. And every year, as a Ravens fan, and Ravens fans were spoiled. They really were. Because every year you knew that team was going to be competitive. Every year you knew that team was going to compete for a division. And you felt like, for the most part, we're going to be a tough out in the playoffs at the very least. So he goes to the New York Football Giants, and you want to talk about an organization lately that's just been so unstable. I mean, ever since Tom Coughlin left and, the Eli Manning era ended, it's just been a revolving door of coaches. Brian Daboll had that one successful first year, but, it really burned out towards the end. And you look at, the whole thing, and I think what John's going to bring that they lacked is a foundation and consistency across the board. John's going to bring in his idea of how this needs to be ran. He's going to install it. He's going to create the foundation and the attitude and the belief that he thinks a successful football team can have. He's got a lot of really good pieces to go with it, right? And Jackson Dart, I think we can all say, was probably one of the more, like, if he was on TV, you were watching. He was probably one of the more fun quarterbacks to watch in the league. I mean, his confidence, his swagger, the way he plays the game. I'm sure Giants fans want him to take less hits, but his fearlessness, and not just fearlessness in taking hits, but his fearlessness to compete with anybody. I mean, when they beat the Eagles, in primetime, that was like, wow. Like, they didn't even have anybody. I think they had Cam Skatibo. They didn't have Malik Neighbors. And they go out and beat them, and everyone was like, whoa. And I think Dart's going to be one of those fun guys to watch in the league. He can just do everything on the field. There's not one thing he can't do. He's got a strong arm, makes plays on the run. He's elusive. He can avoid the rush. And he's just a dynamic playmaker. I think the guys really rally around him for the most part. I know there's some news about him right now. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to talk about the football aspect of things. But you could tell the energy changed when they went from Russell to Jackson. Like, the energy in the building changed. The team had a different sense of belief in themselves. And so I expect him to have some sort of growth going into year 2. Again, a lot of it I think is going to do with John Harbaugh. I think there's just very few respected coaches like John Harbaugh in the NFL. And I think Jackson's going to learn a lot from him. I think he's excited to learn from him. And John really has a chance to really have a new run at this thing. He has a young foundation that he gets to build off of. I think they have a great D line to build off of. Brian Burns, Arvell Reese. We'll see what they do with Kayvon Thibodeau. I think they might want to try and move off him with all the edge rushers they got. They like I said, Arvell Reese and all those guys. I think that's a good foundation on your defense to build off of. And I think Giants fans want to see a nasty, physical, tough defense again. You look at those Super Bowl runs, it's all built off that D-line pressure and how much that defense, bothered Tom Brady in those Super Bowls. I know Eli Manning made some clutch plays, but don't get it twisted, man. That defense is what drove that thing. And I think John's going to really bring back that sort of identity that they want to see back. And then, I think with Jackson, John has seen multiple different ways of how to build a winner. He's had Joe Flacco, where he's kind of had to game manage and not be the driving force of the team. And then he's had Lamar Jackson, who's been the MVP and has led dynamic offenses. So he's seen both sides of it. But I think going into this team, I think he's going to really try and get back to, hard-nosed, gritty, nasty defensive play that can really be the foundation of what this team's about. Because he already has the dynamic quarterback. And I think the offensive side of the ball could mirror the attitude and the identity of the defensive side of the ball, right? Like Jackson kind of brings that physicality and that nastiness as well. And the other guy that can kind of bring that is Cam Skatibo. You want to talk about an absolute maniac in the best way possible, man. Like he's an absolute stud. I really think he reminds me of Christian McCaffrey in a more barbarian kind of way, but he brings that physicality, that toughness, that mental grind to, the way he plays. I mean, some of his runs were they were so inspiring, and you were just like, wow, like there's something to this guy. You didn't know if it was kind of an act or whatever. I never believed it was an act. I think that's just who he is. I was so inspired watching him when he played for Arizona State against Texas and basically almost won the game by himself. I mean, he was catching passes, he was running, he was throwing the football. Guy just wants to win. He's a football player. He is a straight up football player. And, I think with those two guys as your core foundational pieces on offense, I think that's going to go a long way. And again, bringing over that identity and that attitude, right? You look at some of the offseason moves they made, right? Like they got Isaiah Likely, who I thought was a great signing for Jackson Dart. Baltimore fans, I think there's some of them that kind of wish they kept Likely and let go of Mark Andrews. That wasn't the case. And I think Likely's going to pop off. Guy just looks like a big old X-wide receiver. He's fast, he can run, he's athletic. I think Dart's going to have a lot of fun throwing to him. I think he's going to have a huge fantasy year, fantasy football heads thinking like, I would look at that guy late. I think he's going to be a steal. They signed Calvin Austin, Darnell Mooney, who's a dynamic wide receiver that they really need to complement that wide receiver room. They also get Pat Ricard, fullback. So, again, bring in those guys from the foundation he built over there to kind of help build the culture here. It starts with those guys, right? Greg Newsome, I think, could revitalize his career. I know he had a down year going over to Jacksonville, coming over from Cleveland. But I think we need to remember how good of a corner he was with Cleveland. He's still a young guy, still got a lot of tread on the tires, and I think John Harbaugh is going to bring him back to that highly productive player that we really knew him to be. Some other guys that they got in the draft, I want to make sure I say his name right. Francis Mauigoa. He was, he's an offensive lineman. I think, that's always one of the best moves you can do for your young quarterback is build that offensive line. And again, it goes back to what I'm saying about Harbaugh and trying to build this identity. He wants to get physical. He wants to get tough. And what better way to build it through the trenches and, go from the lines out, right? He easily could have went Mekhi Lemon. He could have went, with the sexy wide receiver. But he's like, no, we're gonna build this thing the right way. We're going to help our quarterback because if you lose him, the season's toast anyway. They also signed they drafted Colton Hood, cornerback out of Tennessee. I thought that was a hell of a get. Their secondary really struggled, and they really needed to upgrade that side of the ball. And so getting Colton Hood and Greg Newsome, for that cornerback room is going to be huge. I think you're going to see a difference. They're just not going to get torched as much down the field, and you're really going to have to earn it. And again, I think it's going to help that D-line get some more productive sacks because those guys are going to be able to cover just for a little bit longer. They also drafted Malachi Fields, a wide receiver, in the middle rounds. You might see him get a lot more touches early on. There's a lot of questions with Malik Neighbors. And as much as this sucks to say, but this thing hinges on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of it has to do with Malik Neighbors and that injury. You're seeing reports that, it's not right. It's not totally there yet. They're still waiting, and there's a lot of question marks. And I think that's got Giants fans worried, and it should. When he's healthy, and as a fan of Jackson Dart, so far as the football player, I think we're all wondering how that could look. You get a healthy Malik Neighbors with Jackson Dart, you could see some scary things happen in the NFL. Absolutely dynamic plays. Neighbors' rookie year, I think there was people that were saying he might be the most talented dude in the league. And I get it. And you look at who's throwing them the ball, they're not nearly on the talent level that Jackson Dart is. So when, Neighbors goes down and then Dart takes over, we're like, God, we got to wait a whole year to see how that looks. And you saw the promise with Dart. And so now it's like, okay, with Neighbors, it's like, all right, next season's going to be amazing. Like, Giants fans have not been this excited for an NFL season. I don't even know how long. But with all the excitement, with the attitude, the swagger, John Harbaugh coming in, like, this was supposed to be, like, the season to look forward to. And I will say this, I have them somewhere between 8 and 10 wins. I have them kind of finishing third in the division. It would not shock me if they finish second and they finish with 10 or 11 wins. But I think a lot of it has to do with the health of Malik Neighbors. He just makes that wide receiver room look so much more solid. I think if you have to roll in with Darnell Mooney as your one, Malachi Fields, Calvin Austin, that just doesn't feel like it's going to do enough to put them over the top. So again, sadly enough, I think a lot hinges on Malik Neighbors. If he can come back, they're going to be one of the most fun teams to watch going forward into this NFL season. But if he's not, it's going to leave a big hole on that offense. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think Dart is still going to make some, special plays. I think Isaiah Likely is going to be great. I think John Harbaugh might be the best coach in this division right now. I know that's tough to say with Nick Sirianni, but I just think John's a winner, and I think he's going to come in with something to prove. And I think he's excited with this blank canvas he gets to use. So that's my coverage of the NFC East. I think it's going to be a really compelling division to watch. From Dallas to the Eagles trying to erase last season, and what's going on with the Giants and all the exciting young talent they have with John Harbaugh. And can Jane Daniels come back to being that elite level quarterback? It's going to be a great season to watch, guys. We got some more division videos coming out soon. We're going to have fantasy football videos coming out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Sport Life channel. Thank you.